The scent of old paper and lemon polish always made me feel safe. It was the smell of my father's study, a room he'd left untouched, a sanctuary I'd inherited after he was gone. The leather of his big armchair was worn smooth, cool against my arms even on a warm day. Outside the tall window, an autumn afternoon was fading, the light turning the color of weak tea, casting long, skeletal shadows of the oak trees across the lawn. A persistent chill was seeping through the window pane, a premonition of the coming winter. I could hear the faint, rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, a sound that had been the steady heartbeat of this house, of my life, for as long as I could remember. But that afternoon, the familiar comforts felt like a lie. The safety was an illusion, thin as the dust motes dancing in the slanted light. My own heartbeat was a frantic, panicked bird trapped in my ribs, loud enough to drown out the clock. On the glowing screen of my laptop, the numbers swam, mocking me. They refused to align, refused to make sense. For 3 years since Dad passed, I had managed the books for the Harrison Community Fund, the charity he had poured his heart and soul into. It was his legacy, and I guarded it fiercely. The work was meticulous, a comforting world of spreadsheets and balanced columns. Until now, a discrepancy. At first, it was small, just over $900. I spent an entire morning chasing it, my frustration growing with every dead end. I assumed it was a clerical error, a misplaced decimal, a simple human mistake. My mistake. But as I dug deeper, pulling records from the past 6 months, the small hole became a chasm. Another withdrawal for $5,000, coded to a vendor I'd never heard of. Then another for $12,000. My breath hitched. The air in the room grew thick and heavy, pressing down on me. A cold sweat prickled at my hairline. In total, over the last year, nearly $75,000 had vanished. It wasn't a mistake. It was theft. My first thought, a panicked, desperate one, was that our system had been hacked. Some faceless criminal from halfway around the world had breached our security. It was the only explanation that my mind could process without shattering. I pushed back from the heavy oak desk, the wheels of the chair groaning in protest against the hardwood floor. The scent of lemon polish now seemed cloying, artificial. I needed to tell my mother. I found her in the sunroom, a place that was more hers than any other in the house. It was filled with white wicker furniture and lush, overgrown plants that smelled of damp earth and blooming jasmine. The late afternoon sun streamed through the glass panels, making the room feel warm and bright, a stark contrast to the cold dread that had settled deep in my bones. She was sitting on the settee, a highball glass filled with amber liquid and clinking ice cubes resting on the small table beside her. She wore a cream-colored cashmere sweater, and her blonde hair was perfectly arranged. Even in repose, my mother, Eleanor, was a portrait of effortless grace. "Mom," I said, my voice coming out thin and reedy. She didn't look up from her magazine. "Clara, darling, you've been cooped up in that dusty old room all day. You'll get wrinkles from frowning at that computer screen." Her voice was like smooth, cool silk. I stood in the doorway, twisting the hem of my worn cotton sweater in my hands. "Something's wrong with the fund's accounts." That got her attention. She placed a silver bookmark on her page and set the magazine down, turning her clear blue eyes on me. They were my father's eyes, but where his had been warm and full of laughter, hers were like chips of ice. "Wrong how? Don't tell me you made a mistake, Clara. Your father always said you were the only one he trusted to be precise." The backhanded compliment, the subtle reminder of my duty, was classic Eleanor. I took a deep breath, the floral scent of the room making my head swim. "It's not a mistake. Money is missing. A lot of it." I watched her face carefully, searching for some flicker of shock, of concern. There was nothing. She simply raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "Missing? Don't be dramatic. Money doesn't just go missing. You've misplaced it. A rounding error, I'm sure." She picked up her glass, the ice cubes rattling softly. The sound was unnervingly loud in the quiet room. "It's $75,000, Mom. It's not a rounding error." The words felt heavy and ugly in my mouth. She took a slow, deliberate sip of her drink. Her composure was absolute, a marble statue in a sun-drenched room. "Well," she said, setting the glass down with a soft click, "that is a bit more than a rounding error, isn't it?" She sighed, a delicate, put-upon sound. "We must have been hacked. It's the only explanation. These modern criminals are so clever. We'll have to call the bank and Mr. Davies. What a dreadful nuisance." Her reaction, her immediate leap to the same conclusion I had desperately clung to, should have been a relief. But it wasn't. It felt rehearsed. Too calm. Too easy. There was no panic, no outrage that her husband's legacy had been violated. There was only the mild annoyance of someone whose afternoon had been interrupted. She looked past me, out the window at the dying light. We'll deal with it tomorrow. I have the bridge club dinner tonight. Don't worry your little head about it, Clara. That's what we pay lawyers for. She dismissed me with a wave of her hand, picking up her magazine as if the conversation was over, as if $75,000 were a minor inconvenience, like a scuff mark on her favorite shoes. I walked away, the chill in my bones deepening, a new and terrible unease coiling in my stomach. Her lack of concern was more frightening than any angry outburst would have been. Later that evening, the house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the groan of the old pipes. My mother was out, and my brother, Leo, was a conspicuous absence, as he often was. I was in the kitchen, nursing a mug of chamomile tea, the hot ceramic warming my cold hands. The steam smelled faintly of apples and honey, but I couldn't taste it. My mind was still racing, replaying the numbers, my mother's strange calm. The back door creaked open and then slammed shut, making me jump and slosh tea onto my hand. Leo breezed in, bringing a gust of cold, crisp night air with him. He smelled of pine needles, expensive cologne, and something else, something sharp and alcoholic. His cheeks were flushed, and his eyes were overly bright. At 26, 2 years younger than me, Leo still possessed the boyish charm that had always allowed him to get away with anything. "Clara Bean," he said, his voice a little too loud. He dropped a kiss on the top of my head and went straight for the refrigerator. "Starving. Mom, leave any of that pot roast." "Leo, where have you been?" I asked, my voice tight. "Out," he said, his voice muffled as he rummaged through the shelves. "Networking. Making connections. The usual." He emerged with a container of leftovers and a triumphant grin. His smile was dazzling. It always was. It was the smile he used to charm investors for his latest doomed-to-fail startup. The smile he used to placate our mother. The smile that made you forget he'd forgotten your birthday for the 3rd year in a row. "I found something today," I said, my voice low. "In the fund's accounts." He paused, the plastic container in his hand. He didn't look at me, his focus entirely on peeling back the lid. "Oh yeah, find a secret stash Dad left for his favorite daughter?" "Don't joke, Leo. It's serious. Money's missing." He finally looked up. His charming smile didn't falter, but something in his eyes shifted, a flicker of something guarded and cold. It was there and gone in a second. "Missing? What, like $100? 75,000. He let out a low whistle, leaning back against the cool granite countertop. He didn't seem shocked or worried. He seemed intrigued. "Wow, that's a chunk of change. Did you tell Mom?" "I did. She thinks we were hacked." "Sounds about right," he said, turning his attention back to the food. He grabbed a fork and started eating the cold roast beef directly from the container. "Probably some kid in a basement in Russia. Don't sweat it, Clara. That's what insurance is for." His nonchalance was a mirror of our mother's. It was a family trait, it seemed, to treat catastrophe with a shrug. But I had always been different. I had my father's anxious heart, his sense of responsibility. "It's Dad's legacy, Leo. It's not just about the money. Someone violated it. Don't you care?" He swallowed a mouthful of food and finally gave me his full attention. He walked over and put his free hand on my shoulder, his grip warm and firm. The scent of his cologne was overpowering up close. "Of course I care, sis. But you worry too much. You always have. You get that furrow between your eyebrows, just like Dad used to." He squeezed my shoulder. "Let the pros handle it. Mom's right. We have Davies for a reason. Now, are you going to finish that tea or just stare into it like it holds the secrets of the universe?" He gave me one last dazzling smile before turning back to his late-night snack. But as I watched him, a sliver of ice slid into my gut. His reassurance didn't feel reassuring. It felt like a deflection, a practiced performance of a concerned brother. The casual way he dismissed a sum of money that could have funded a dozen community projects, the way his eyes had hardened for just a fraction of a second, it didn't feel right. The house, once my sanctuary, was beginning to feel like a stage, and I was the only one who didn't know my lines. That night, I barely slept. I lay in my childhood bed, listening to the house settle around me, the groans of the old would sounding like whispered secrets. The numbers from the spreadsheet were burned into the back of my eyelids, a meaningless jumble that added up to a single, terrifying truth. Someone was lying. The next few days were a masterclass in my family's unique brand of denial. My mother acted as if nothing had happened. She hosted her book club, the air filling with the scent of baked brie and expensive perfume, her laughter tinkling through the downstairs rooms. Leo was in and out, a whirlwind of charm and vague business meetings, always with a plausible excuse for his absences. When I tried to bring up the missing money, they would shut me down with practiced ease. "Clara, Mr. Davies is handling it," my mother would say, her tone final. "Let it go." Or Leo would clap me on the back and say, "Come on, Clara Bean, let's not be morbid. It's just money." But I couldn't let it go. It was a splinter under my skin. I started my own quiet investigation. I couldn't shake the feeling that the hacker theory was too convenient. The withdrawals weren't random. They were structured, transferred to a holding company with a generic name, Apex Solutions. It felt deliberate, professional. I spent hours in the study, the door locked, poring over digital records. The air grew stale, tasting of my own anxious breath and cooling coffee. The ticking of the clock in the hall was no longer a comfort, it was a countdown. One afternoon, I was trying to trace the IP address of the transfers. It was a long shot, I wasn't an expert. But the logs showed the transactions had been initiated from a computer on our own network. Not from Russia or China or some anonymous server farm. From inside this house. The world tilted. The blood pounded in my ears, a deafening drumbeat. I gripped the edge of the desk, my knuckles white. The polished wood felt slick and cold beneath my fingers. It had to be a mistake. A ghost in the machine. But the data was clear. Someone sitting in this very house, breathing this very air, had stolen my father's legacy. It couldn't be my mother. She had her own money, a sizable inheritance from her parents. She valued appearances, and her standing in the community, far too much to risk a scandal like this. Which left Leo, my charming, reckless, perpetually in-debt brother. The brother whose last 3 startups had crashed and burned, leaving a trail of angry investors. The brother who always seemed to have cash for a new sports car or a weekend trip to Vegas, even when he was supposedly broke. A wave of nausea washed over me. I felt a profound sense of betrayal, so sharp and painful it was like a physical blow. I thought of all the times I'd covered for him, loaned him money I couldn't really spare, defended him to our father. I loved my brother. The thought of him doing this was unbearable. But I had to know. That evening, I waited until he was out, his car roaring down the long gravel driveway. Then, my heart thumping against my ribs like a trapped bird, I went to his room. I had never done it before. We had an unspoken rule about privacy. His room was a mess, a chaotic landscape of discarded clothes, tech gadgets, and empty energy drink cans. It smelled of stale air and his cloying cologne. I felt like a trespasser, a thief. My hands were shaking as I turned on his laptop. I prayed he wouldn't have a password. He didn't. He was always careless. I started searching his files, my breath held tight in my chest. I didn't know what I was looking for. Bank statements, emails, anything. After 10 minutes of fruitless searching, I almost gave up. Then I saw it. A folder on his desktop, innocently labeled projects. Inside were files that mirrored the fund's accounting software. And there it was, a detailed ledger of the transfers to Apex Solutions. Alongside it were notes, plans. A strategy to bleed the account dry slowly, making it look like legitimate business expenses. And then the final, gut-wrenching piece of the puzzle. A document outlining how to route the final, largest transfer in a way that would implicate the account's primary administrator. Me. I stared at the screen, the words blurring through a sudden film of tears. The air left my lungs in a silent gasp. It wasn't just theft. It was a plan. A plan to steal the money, and then frame me for the crime. My own brother. He would let me take the fall, let my father's legacy be a stain on my name, just to save his own skin. I heard the crunch of tires on the gravel outside. Leo was home. Panic seized me. I quickly closed the files, my fingers fumbling on the trackpad. I shut down the laptop and straightened the desk as best I could, my mind screaming. I fled his room, my heart hammering, the scent of his cologne clinging to me like an accusation. I made it back to my own room just as I heard the front door open and his cheerful voice call out, "Anyone home?" I locked my door and sank to the floor, pressing my back against the cool wood. I wrapped my arms around my knees, trying to stop my body from shaking. The betrayal was a living thing inside me, a cold, venomous creature, sinking its fangs into my heart. He wasn't just a thief. He was a monster wearing my brother's face. And our mother? Her strange calm, her immediate dismissal, she had to know. She had to be in on it. They were protecting him, and they were going to sacrifice me. The next morning, the air in the house was thick with unspoken things. I came down to the kitchen to find my mother and Leo sitting at the breakfast nook, a space usually flooded with cheerful morning light. Today the sky was overcast, and the room was gray and shadowed. They were speaking in low voices, but they fell silent the moment I entered. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee, usually a welcoming scent, smelled bitter and burnt. My mother smiled at me, a tight, brittle thing that didn't reach her icy eyes. "Clara, dear, you look like you haven't slept a wink." Leo wouldn't look at me at all. He just stared into his coffee cup as if it held the answers to the universe. The charming, carefree mask was gone. In its place was a sullen, anxious stranger. I didn't know what to do, what to say. The evidence on his laptop was a burning secret in my mind. Should I confront them? Go to the police? My thoughts were a tangled, panicked mess. All I knew was that the two people who were supposed to be my family were my enemies. The ground beneath my feet had crumbled away, and I was in a free fall. "Mr. Davies is coming over this morning," my mother announced, her voice artificially bright. "He wants to have a family meeting, to discuss the unfortunate business with the fund." My blood ran cold. This was it. The trap was about to be sprung. I felt a wave of dizziness, and I gripped the back of a chair to steady myself. "A family meeting?" I repeated, my voice a hoarse whisper. "Yes," she said, her eyes finally meeting mine. There was no warmth in them, only a chilling, resolute hardness. "It's time we sorted this out, once and for all." The grandfather clock in the hall began to chime 10, each resonant bong a hammer blow against my frayed nerves. Mr. Davies arrived precisely on time. He was a tall, thin man who always seemed to be made of sharp angles and dry paper. He smelled of mothballs and stale cigars. He wasn't just our family lawyer. He was an old friend of my father's, a man I had known my entire life. I had always trusted him. Now, looking at his grim, unreadable face, I wasn't so sure. My mother led us into the formal living room, a space reserved for important guests and holidays. The air was still and cool, heavy with the scent of potpourri and old velvet. The heavy drapes were drawn, plunging the room into a gloomy twilight, even though it was mid-morning. Dust motes swirled in the few beams of light that managed to slice through the darkness. We sat in the stiff, uncomfortable armchairs, a vast Persian rug separating us like a silent, blood-red sea. My mother sat perfectly poised on the love seat, Leo beside her, his leg jiggling with a nervous energy that vibrated through the floor. I sat alone, my hands clenched into fists in my lap, my palms slick with sweat. Mr. Davies opened his worn leather briefcase with a series of loud, ominous clicks. He laid out a thin file on the polished mahogany coffee table. "Eleanor Leo Clara," he began, his voice dry as dust. "As you know, we have been looking into the financial irregularities at the Harrison Fund. The initial theory was an external breach, a hacker. However, our forensic accountant has concluded his preliminary investigation." He paused, letting the silence stretch, thick and suffocating. I could hear my own ragged breathing. "The transfers were not made from an outside source," he continued, his gaze sweeping over the three of us before settling, with what felt like a physical weight, on me. "They were initiated from a computer inside this house. Furthermore, they were made using the primary administrator's login credentials. Clara, those credentials belong to you." The room was utterly silent. The accusation hung in the air, a poisonous fog. I felt my mother's and Leo's eyes on me. I opened my mouth to speak, to tell them what I had found, to expose Leo, but the words wouldn't come. My throat was tight, strangled with shock and betrayal. I didn't," I finally managed to whisper. The sound was pathetic, lost in the cavernous room. My mother let out a soft, theatrical gasp. She put a hand to her chest, her face a perfect mask of sorrow and disbelief. "Oh, Clara," she breathed, her voice trembling with manufactured pain. "How could you?" I stared at her, dumbfounded. The performance was flawless. She looked like a mother whose heart was breaking, not like a conspirator in a cold, calculated plot. "Mom, no," I pleaded, turning to her. "It wasn't me. I found—" "Please, darling, don't make this worse by lying," she cut me off, her voice laced with a cruel, pitying tone. She turned her tear-filled eyes to the lawyer. "David, I just can't believe it. Our Clara. She's always been so intense. So obsessed with that fund. We never imagined." She trailed off, dabbing at her dry eyes with a delicate handkerchief. Leo, my brother, my accomplice in childhood mischief, the person I should have been able to count on above all others, said nothing. He just stared at his hands, his face pale and slack. He wouldn't look at me. His silence was a confession, a knife twisting in my gut. He was letting her do this. He was going to let me take the fall. Mr. Davies, I said, my voice shaking but growing stronger with a surge of desperate anger. It was Leo. I saw the files on his computer. He planned the whole thing. He planned to frame me. Mr. Davies's expression didn't change. It remained a stony mask of professional detachment. Leo, he said, his voice even. Is this true? The room held its breath. This was it. The moment of truth. Leo finally lifted his head. He looked at our mother, a quick, panicked glance, and I saw her give him the slightest, almost imperceptible shake of her head. Then he turned his eyes to me. They were filled with a misery so profound it almost looked genuine, but underneath it was the hard, cold glint of self-preservation. No, he said, his voice cracking. Clara, how could you say that? I know you've been under a lot of stress since Dad died, but to make up something like this. He looked at Mr. Davies, his expression pleading. She's been acting strangely for months. Locked in the study, talking to herself. We've been so worried about her. The lies were so audacious, so complete, they stole the air from my lungs. They hadn't just framed me for the crime, they had built a narrative around it. They were painting me as unstable, as mentally unwell. It was perfect. It was diabolical. That's a lie. I shouted, a raw, ragged sound that tore from my throat. I shot to my feet, my chair scraping harshly against the floor. You're both lying. Tell him the truth, Leo. For God's sake, tell the truth. Leo flinched, shrinking back against the cushions as if he were afraid of me. My mother rose gracefully, moving to stand between us, a protective shield for her guilty son. That's enough, Clara, she said, her voice dropping to a low, menacing whisper that only I could hear. You are hysterical. You are making a scene. You will stop this right now. Then, raising her voice for the lawyer to hear, she projected pure, maternal anguish. Oh, my poor girl. My poor, troubled girl. David, what are we going to do? Mr. Davies slowly closed the file on the table. The soft thud echoed the closing of a door, the finality of a verdict. He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. It wasn't accusation. It was pity. And it was so much worse. He believed them. Or, at the very least, he was choosing to believe them. He had known my mother and Leo, with their polished surfaces and easy charm, for years. I was the quiet one, the intense one, the one who lived in the shadow of my father's study. I was the easier one to sacrifice. Given the circumstances, Mr. Davies said, his voice grave, and in order to protect the reputation of the fund and the Harrison family name, we need to handle this matter internally. Clara, the family has decided it would be best if you took some time away. To get some help. Took some time away. Got some help. The euphemisms were suffocating. They were casting me out. They weren't just framing me, they were erasing me, declaring me unfit, unstable, gone. I looked from my mother's cold, triumphant face to my brother's averted gaze, to the lawyer's pitying stare. The beautiful, silent room felt like a tomb. The air was unbreathable. I was utterly, completely alone. They had thought of everything. They had closed every door. And in that moment, the raw, screaming grief of my father's death returned with a vengeance, because I realized he had been the only one in this family who had ever truly seen me, the only one who had ever truly loved me. And he was gone. And in his place were these monsters, wearing the faces of my mother and my brother. The fight went out of me, replaced by a cold, hollow emptiness. I sank back into my chair, the plush velvet feeling like a cage. The trap had been sprung, and I was caught. The hours that followed were a blur of cold, quiet horror. My mother, her role as the grieving matriarch firmly established, dictated the terms of my exile. Her voice was soft, laced with a false sympathy that was more painful than any shout. She spoke of a wellness retreat in the mountains, a place where I could rest and recover. It was a prison with a pretty name. She said it was for my own good, that they were all so worried about my mental state. Each word was a careful, deliberate twist of the knife. Leo remained a ghost, flitting in and out of rooms, never meeting my eye, his face a mask of pale misery. He was a coward, and I hated him with a pure, searing intensity that scared me. I hated him for his weakness, for his betrayal, for letting our mother's poison seep into him until he became just as toxic as she was. Mr. Davies had left, his briefcase full of lies, leaving behind a silence that was heavier and more oppressive than any argument. I was instructed to go to my room and pack a bag. Just a small one, for a short stay. I walked up the grand, curving staircase as if in a dream, my hand trailing along the smooth, cool wood of the banister. Every part of this house, every scent, every sound was now tainted. The familiar ticking of the grandfather clock sounded like a mocking laugh. My room was just as I had left it, the bed unmade, a book lying open on my nightstand. The air smelled of me, of my lavender soap and the old books I kept piled by my bed. It was the only space that felt real in a world that had become a nightmare. I moved slowly, numbly, pulling a duffel bag from the back of my closet. The rasp of the zipper was a jarring, violent sound in the quiet. What do you pack for the day your life ends? I pulled out a few sweaters, a pair of jeans, my toothbrush. Each mundane item felt absurd. My hands brushed against a framed photograph on my dresser. It was of me and Leo, taken about 10 years ago on a family vacation. We were teenagers, grinning, arms slung around each other, the sun in our eyes. The memory of that day, of the uncomplicated love I'd felt for my brother, was so painful it made me gasp. I picked up the frame, my fingers trembling, and for a moment, I wanted to smash it against the wall, to shatter the happy, lying image into 1,000 pieces. But I didn't. I gently laid it face down on the dresser, a small, quiet act of severing the past. A soft knock came at the door. "Clara?" It was Leo's voice, tentative and low. "Go away," I said, my voice flat and dead. The door opened anyway. He stood in the doorway, looking lost and small. He wasn't the charming golden boy now. He was just a scared kid who had done a monstrous thing. "I'm sorry," he whispered. The words were so inadequate, so insulting, they were almost funny. "Sorry?" I turned to face him, a cold, bitter laugh bubbling up from my chest. "You're sorry? You stole $75,000 from a charity our father built. You destroyed his legacy. And then you and that woman downstairs pinned it on me. You're trying to convince the world I'm crazy, so you can get away with it. What, exactly, are you sorry for, Leo? That you got caught, or that you had to throw your sister to the wolves to save yourself?" Tears welled in his eyes. They looked real. Maybe they were. Maybe a part of him still had a conscience. "I didn't know what to do," he stammered, his voice breaking. "I was in trouble. Bad trouble. People were pressuring me. I needed the money. I was going to pay it back, I swear." "Pay it back?" I said, my voice dripping with contempt. "With what?" "The profits from another one of your brilliant startups that never get off the ground. You didn't just need money, Leo. You needed a scapegoat. And there I was. The quiet, responsible one. The easy target. It was Mom's idea," he blurted out, the words tumbling over each other in a desperate rush. "The framing part. I just told her about the money, and she just took over. She said it was the only way to protect the family. To protect me. Of course it was her idea. It had her fingerprints all over it, the cold, strategic cruelty, the flawless execution. She was protecting her precious, perfect son, the one who reflected her own narcissism back at her. I was just collateral damage. She's not protecting you, you idiot," I said, my voice dangerously low. "She's controlling you. She owns you now. You'll spend the rest of your life paying for this, one way or another." He took a step into the room, his hand outstretched. "Clara, please. Don't hate me." I looked at his hand, then back at his tear-streaked face. The love I once had for him was gone, burned away, leaving nothing but a cold, empty crater. "It's too late for that," I said, turning my back on him. "Get out of my room." He stood there for a long moment, his ragged breathing the only sound. Then, with a choked sob, he turned and fled. I listened to his footsteps hurrying down the hall, the sound fading away. I was alone again. An hour later, my mother appeared at my door. She was dressed to go out, in a smart navy blue coat and leather gloves. Her face was serene, composed. "Are you ready, dear?" she asked, as if she were asking if I was ready for a shopping trip. I zipped the duffel bag, the sound echoing the finality I felt. I hoisted it onto my shoulder. It was heavier than it should have been. I walked past her without a word, down the stairs and toward the front door. She followed me, her heels clicking softly on the hardwood floors. At the door, I paused, my hand on the cold brass knob. I turned to face her one last time. I needed to understand. "Why?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "He's your son. But I'm your daughter. Why him over me?" She looked at me, and for a fleeting second, her mask of composure slipped. I saw something raw and ugly in her eyes, a flash of resentment, of long-buried jealousy. "Leo needs me," she said, her voice a thin, sharp blade. "He is charming and bright, but he is vulnerable. He needs my protection. You were always your father's child. So stubborn, so independent. You never needed me." And there it was, the truth in all its twisted, pathetic glory. It wasn't about love or protection. It was about need. About control. I didn't need her, so I was disposable. The emptiness inside me began to fill with a slow, burning rage. It was a clean, purifying fire. "You're wrong," I said, my voice clear and steady for the first time all day. "I did need you. I needed a mother. But I never had one." I opened the front door and walked out into the cold, gray afternoon. I didn't look back. The air was damp and smelled of rain and decaying leaves. I walked down the long driveway, the gravel crunching under my feet. I didn't know where I was going. I had my wallet, my phone, and a duffel bag full of clothes. I had been cast out of my home, betrayed by my family, and branded a criminal and a lunatic. They thought they had won. They thought they had silenced me. But as the cold air filled my lungs, that burning rage solidified into something else, resolve. This wasn't the end. This was the beginning. I would not let them destroy me. I would clear my name, and I would make them pay. I reached the end of the driveway, and for the first time, I looked back at the grand, beautiful house. It looked like a mausoleum, a tomb full of secrets and lies. I turned my back on it for good and started walking down the road into the unknown. The first few nights were a blur of cheap motels on the outskirts of town. The rooms all smelled the same, of stale cigarette smoke, industrial cleaner, and desperation. I lay awake on lumpy mattresses, staring at the water-stained ceilings, the sounds of traffic and strangers' arguments seeping through the thin walls. During the day, I sat in coffee shops, nursing a single cup for hours, using their free Wi-Fi to frantically search for lawyers, for PIs, for anyone who might listen. But I had no money and no proof. The evidence was on Leo's laptop. In that house I could never enter again. My word against theirs. An unstable daughter against a concerned mother and a grieving brother. I knew how that would play out. My bank account, a joint one with my mother for emergencies, had been frozen. Of course it had. They had cut off every escape route. I was running out of cash, and a cold, gnawing panic was setting in. I felt like a ghost, haunting the edges of a life that was no longer mine. Every time I saw a police car, my heart would leap into my throat. Were they looking for me? Had my mother actually reported me as a missing, unstable person? After a week of this, huddled in a booth at a greasy spoon diner, the smell of frying bacon and bitter coffee thick in the air, I hit rock bottom. I was exhausted, terrified, and utterly alone. My rage had cooled to a dull, hopeless ache. They had won. I scrolled through the contacts on my phone, my thumb hovering over the few friends I had. But what could I say? My mother and brother framed me for embezzlement and are trying to have me committed. It sounded insane. They would make concerned phone calls to my mother, and she would weep and tell them how worried she was, how I was having a breakdown, and they would believe her. Then I saw a name I hadn't thought of in years, Aunt Carol, my father's younger sister. She was the black sheep of the family, a free-spirited artist who lived a few states away in a small coastal town. My mother had always despised her, calling her irresponsible and eccentric. Dad had always had a soft spot for her. They had a bond that Eleanor could never touch. We hadn't been close, but she had sent me a kind, handwritten letter after Dad died, telling me to call her if I ever needed anything. I had never taken her up on it. Until now. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely dial the number. It rang 4 times, and I was about to hang up, my courage failing, when a voice answered, warm and slightly raspy. "Hello, Aunt Carol?" I whispered, my voice thick with unshed tears. "Clara? Is that you, sweetheart? You sound a million miles away." And then it all came out. The whole sordid, unbelievable story. I sobbed into the cheap diner phone, the words tumbling out in a torrent of pain and betrayal. The money, the files on Leo's laptop, the family meeting, the lies, the wellness retreat. I expected her to be shocked, to be skeptical. But she just listened, the silence on her end of the line a comforting, steady presence. When I was finished, my voice raw and my body shaking with spent emotion, she didn't hesitate for a second. "That woman," she said, her voice a low, angry growl. "I knew she was a viper. I told your father for years, but he was blinded by her. Okay, honey, here's what you're going to do. Where are you right now?" I told her the name of the town. "All right, get on a bus. I'm wiring you money for the ticket right now. To my bank, just tell them my name and show your ID. It won't be much, but it'll get you here. Text me when you're on your way. You're coming to stay with me. We're going to figure this out, Clara. Together." For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, a fragile sliver of hope pierced through my despair. I wasn't alone anymore. The bus ride was long and grueling, 22 hours of rumbling engines, the scent of stale air freshener, and the strange intimacy of sleeping next to strangers. But with every mile that separated me from my old life, I felt a weight lifting. I watched the manicured suburbs of my hometown give way to sprawling farmland, and then to the rugged, windswept coastline of New England. Aunt Carol was waiting for me at the bus station. She was smaller than I remembered, with a wild mane of graying red hair pulled back in a messy bun and paint splatters on her denim jacket. She didn't look like my father, but she had his eyes, the same warm, kind eyes that saw right through you. She wrapped me in a fierce hug that smelled of turpentine, sea salt, and something warm and spicy like cinnamon. "You're safe now," she whispered into my hair, and I believed her. Her house was a tiny, cluttered cottage perched on a cliff overlooking the ocean. The air inside was warm and smelled of brewing tea and oil paints. Canvases in various stages of completion were stacked against every wall, vibrant explosions of color that felt like a direct contradiction to the gray, muted world I had been living in. The constant sound was the rhythmic crash of waves against the rocks below, a powerful, cleansing sound. For the first few days, I just slept. The emotional and physical exhaustion was bone deep. Carol let me be, leaving trays of food outside my door. Hearty soups, thick slices of bread, and endless cups of herbal tea. When I finally emerged, feeling more human, she sat me down at her rickety kitchen table, a steaming mug in my hands, and looked at me with those perceptive eyes. "All right," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "We need a plan. Crying is done. Now we fight back." And so we began. Her small, sun-drenched kitchen became our war room. The rhythmic crash of the waves outside was the soundtrack to our counteroffensive. We had no resources, no access to the evidence. All we had was my memory and Carol's unshakable belief in me. "Eleanor's mistake," Carol said one afternoon, pacing back and forth in front of a half-finished seascape, "is that she thinks she's smarter than everyone else. And Leo's mistake is that he's sloppy. He's a charming, sloppy fool. He left a trail. We just have to find it." She was right. Leo lived his life online, a carefully curated performance of success and adventure. While I had been locked away in the study, he had been flaunting a lifestyle the fund's money had paid for. Carol, who had a surprising knack for social media stalking, created a fake profile and started digging. We went through years of his posts and the posts of his friends. "Look at this," she said, pointing a paint-stained finger at her laptop screen. It was a photo from a friend of Leo's, posted 8 months ago. Leo was on a yacht, champagne bottle in hand, grinning his dazzling smile. The caption read, "Celebrating the big win with Leo Harrison." The photo was geotagged. It was in Monaco, on a Tuesday. I cross-referenced the date with my memory of the fund's accounts. It was the day after a $30,000 withdrawal had been made to Apex Solutions. He told me he was at a tech conference in Austin that week. I said, a cold fury rising in me. We kept digging. A photo of him at a high-stakes poker game in a private club, posted by another friend. A picture of a new, ridiculously expensive watch on his own account, with a caption about treating himself. Each post was another nail in his coffin. It wasn't hard proof of embezzlement, but it was a clear pattern, a large, unexplained withdrawal from the fund, followed by a lavish, inexplicable expense. The real breakthrough came from a place I never would have thought to look. Carol was scrolling through the comments on one of Leo's photos when she saw a series of angry messages from a man named Marcus Thorne. "Where's my money, Harrison?" one read. "You think I'm kidding? Pay up." Most of the comments had been deleted, but Carol had managed to screenshot them before they vanished. A quick search of Marcus Thorne revealed he was a bookie, a rather unsavory character who operated in a gray area of the law. He had a reputation for being aggressive with clients who didn't pay their debts. "This is it," Carol said, her eyes shining with a fierce light. "This is our leverage. Leo wasn't just in debt. He was in debt to someone dangerous. That's why he was so desperate. That's our motive." The next step was the most dangerous. We had to contact Marcus Thorne. Carol found a number for him through a series of increasingly shady online forums. I was terrified. He was a criminal. What if he came after us? "He's not going to hurt us," Carol said, her voice steady, calming my frayed nerves. "He wants one thing, his money. He doesn't care where it comes from. Right now, he thinks Leo is a dead end. We're going to offer him a new one." She made the call. I sat beside her, my heart pounding against my ribs, listening to her side of the conversation. Her voice was calm and businesslike. She didn't threaten. She didn't plead. She made a proposition. Mr. Thorne, she said. I believe we have a mutual acquaintance, Leo Harrison. Yes, I understand, he owes you a significant amount of money. What if I told you there was a way you could get it back? All of it? With interest? No, I don't have the money. But I know where it is. It's in a family trust. But Leo's mother is blocking access. She's protecting him, you see. She's even framed his sister for his financial crimes to cover his tracks. Yes, his sister, Clara. That's who I'm working for. All we need is proof of Leo's debt to you. A signed ledger, a record of his bets, anything you have. Present that to the family's lawyer, and I guarantee you, his mother will pay you whatever you want to make this go away. A scandal is the one thing she cannot afford. It was a brilliant, terrifying bluff. We were using the truth as a weapon, aiming it not at Leo, but at our mother's greatest weakness, her public image. Carol hung up the phone, her expression grim but triumphant. He'll do it, she said. He's greedy, and he's angry. He'll send the proof to Davies by the end of the day. And just like that, the tables had turned. We weren't hiding anymore. We were on the attack. The next day my phone rang. It was an unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. Clara. It was Mr. Davies. His voice was strained, the usual dry detachment gone. We need to talk. Can you come to my office? A cold thrill, a mixture of fear and vindication, shot through me. I'll be there tomorrow morning, I said, my own voice steady and strong. I looked at Carol, who gave me a fierce, proud smile. The war was not over, but we had just won a major battle. I was going back, not as a victim, but as the one holding all the cards. The drive back to my hometown was surreal. The familiar landmarks, the old movie theater, the town square, the tree-lined streets, felt like part of a life that belonged to someone else. I wasn't the same person who had fled down this road in a haze of grief and terror. The fear was still there, a low hum beneath the surface, but it was overshadowed by a cold, hard resolve. Aunt Carol sat in the passenger seat, a silent, solid presence. She had insisted on coming, on being my witness and my rock. Mr. Davies's office was on the top floor of the oldest building downtown, a stuffy wood-paneled space that smelled of old leather and floor wax. The air was thick with the weight of generations of secrets. He looked older than he had just a few weeks ago. There were new lines around his eyes, and his posture was stooped, as if under a great weight. He didn't offer pity this time. He offered me a chair with a gesture of weary respect. Clara, he began, forgoing any pleasantries. I received a package yesterday, from a man named Marcus Thorne. He slid a file across his massive mahogany desk. It contained a detailed ledger of your brother's gambling debts. They are substantial. They also happen to align perfectly with the dates of the withdrawals from the fund. I didn't say anything. I just looked at him, letting the silence stretch. I wanted him to squirm. I wanted him to acknowledge what he had done, how easily he had believed the lies, how quickly he had discarded me. He had the grace to look ashamed. He cleared his throat, his gaze dropping to the papers on his desk. I spoke with your mother this morning, and with Leo. The truth has come out. He said the word truth, as if it were a foreign object in his mouth. Leo has confessed. To everything. Vindication was a strange, hollow feeling. It wasn't the triumphant joy I had expected. It was a quiet, somber confirmation of a heartbreaking reality. Your mother is prepared to make restitution, he continued, his voice low. She will repay the full amount to the fund. She will also settle Leo's debts with Mr. Thorne. She wants this to go away quietly. No police. No scandal. He looked up at me, his eyes pleading. She is asking for your discretion, Clara. For the sake of the family name. For your father's memory. The audacity of it, even now, was breathtaking. After everything they had done, they were asking for my silence. They wanted to buy it, to sweep their monstrous betrayal under the rug and pretend it never happened. My father's memory? I said, my voice dangerously soft. You want to talk about my father's memory? They defiled it. They used his legacy as their personal piggy bank, and when they got caught, they tried to brand his daughter a thief and a lunatic. And you, I said, my gaze hardening as I stared at him. You stood by and let them. You helped them. So don't you dare speak to me about my father's memory. Mr. Davies flinched, a dull red flush creeping up his neck. I apologize, Clara. I made a grievous error in judgment. I allowed my long relationship with your mother to cloud my professional obligations. There is no excuse. Carol, who had been silent until now, spoke up, her voice clear and strong. An error in judgment? You almost helped them ruin her life. An apology isn't going to cut it. A cold, clear certainty settled over me. I knew what I had to do. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about making them suffer, though a part of me certainly wanted to. It was about justice, and it was about freedom. My freedom. Here is what is going to happen, I said, leaning forward in my chair. My voice didn't shake. You will draft a legally binding document. In it, Leo will make a full written confession to the embezzlement and the plan to frame me. My mother will sign as a witness. That document will be delivered to me, and I will keep it in a safe place. Second, my mother will sign over my half of the inheritance my father left me, free and clear, with no strings attached. It will be transferred to an account of my choosing by the end of the week. I don't want her money. I want my father's money, the money he intended for me to have. I paused, letting my demands sink in. Mr. Davies just stared at me, his mouth slightly agape. And third, I continued, I never want to see either of them again. No calls, no letters, no messages through third parties. As far as I am concerned, my family died with my father. If these terms are not met, then that confession goes directly to the district attorney and the front page of the local newspaper. Is that clear? He nodded slowly, his eyes wide. Perfectly clear. Good, I said, standing up. Carol stood with me. You have 24 hours to draw up the papers. We walked out of his office, leaving him sitting stunned in our wake. The air outside felt fresh and clean. The sun had broken through the clouds, and the light felt different, sharper. As we walked to the car, Carol slipped her arm through mine. I am so damn proud of you, she said, her voice thick with emotion. The next day, a courier delivered a thick envelope to Carol's cottage. Inside was everything I had asked for: Leo's signed confession, my mother's signature as a witness, and the documents confirming the transfer of my inheritance. Reading Leo's confession, written in his familiar looping script, was a final, painful severance. He spared no detail, laying out the cold mechanics of his crime and their plot against me. There was no apology, no remorse. It was just a statement of facts, a document born of fear, not regret. I folded the papers and put them away. I didn't need to look at them again. Their power was in their existence, a shield I would carry with me forever. A week later, I was packing my bags again. But this time was different. The air didn't smell of betrayal. It smelled of sea salt and Carol's cinnamon tea. I wasn't running away. I was moving toward something. I had my own money now, a chance to build a life from scratch, a life on my own terms. I decided to stay in Carol's town for a while, find a small apartment by the water. The sound of the ocean felt like a promise of renewal. On my last evening at the cottage, Carol and I sat on her small porch, wrapped in blankets, watching the sun set over the ocean. The sky was a spectacular blaze of orange, pink, and purple. The waves crashed against the shore, a timeless, powerful rhythm. What will you do now? She asked gently. I thought for a moment, watching a lone seagull glide on the wind. I don't know, I said honestly. For the first time in my life, I have no plan. I'm not guarding a legacy. I'm not trying to live up to anyone's expectations. I'm just me. I turned to her, a genuine smile spreading across my face, feeling the pull of it in muscles that had been tight with grief and anger for so long. And it feels incredible. I would never forget what they did to me. The scars of their betrayal would always be a part of me, a reminder of how quickly a world can shatter. But they were just scars, not open wounds. They no longer had power over me. They were trapped in their beautiful house, a prison of their own making, bound together by their ugly secrets. Leo would forever be indebted to our mother, his life no longer his own. And Eleanor would have her perfect son, her perfect public image, but she would live in constant fear that my silence would one day end. But me? I was free. I had walked through fire and come out the other side, not unscathed but stronger, forged anew. I took a deep breath of the cold, salty air, and for the first time in a very long time, I felt the unmistakable sensation of peace. The sun dipped below the horizon, and the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky. A new day was coming. My day.